Deep in the rugged foothills of western North Carolina, nature has spent the last century reclaiming an empire. If you hike through the steep, boulder-strewn wilderness of Wilson Creek Gorge today, you'll find one of the most beautiful trout streams in America. But if you look closely into the tree lines, you'll notice unnatural ridges, hand-cut stone pillars rotting in the mud, concrete foundations swallowed by moss. A century ago, this silent forest was a loud industrial battleground. Men came here to conquer some of the most unforgiving terrain in the Appalachian Mountains, driving steel rails deep into the wilderness to harvest millions of board feet of ancient hardwood timber. This was the northern extension of the Carolina and Northwestern Railway. To the locals who lived along its path from Hickory to Edgemont, it earned a deeply affectionate yet sarcastic nickname, Can't and Never Will. Officially, it was nicknamed because the railroad constantly promised grand expansions across the Blue Ridge Mountains that never actually materialized. But practically, it was because the mountain itself seemed determined to push the steel tracks back into the valley. For decades, rail fans, hikers, and local historians have tried to piece together exactly how the Lost Mountain Network operated. The mainstream history books only show the main line, but today, right here on my channel, we are pulling back the curtain. This is the complete and exclusive look at the only known surviving map of the W.M. Ritter Lumber Company's hidden mountain logging tracks. Today, we are going to trace this line from its origins to its tragic, sudden death, from the narrow gauge pioneers who first broke the mountain dirt to the massive company towns built from scratch, and finally to the incredible living time capsules that still run on the surviving tracks today. Grab your hard hat, we are exploring the lost rails of Wilson Creek. To understand how a railroad ever made it into the treacherous Wilson Creek Gorge, we have to travel back into the late 1800s, before the Carolina and Northwestern standard gauge tracks even existed. The region relied on a humble narrow gauge network. In the mountains, standard gauge rail lines are incredibly expensive to build. They require wide turns, massive bridges, and gentle slopes. Narrow gauge tracks, measuring just 3 feet apart, were ultimately the hack for the Appalachian engineers. They allowed trains to navigate incredibly sharp curves and climb impossibly steep mountain faces, hugging the natural contours of the rock. In 1893, a new player entered the game, the Carolina and Northwestern Railroad. Chartered specifically to tap the untouched, wealthy timber reserves of Lenoir, this narrow-gauge pioneer began pushing its way through Collettsville and straight towards the foothills. The timber in these mountains was legendary. Giant virgin hardwoods, oaks, poplars, and chestnuts that had grown undisturbed for centuries. The Caldwell Northern was the key that unlocked this treasure chest. But operating a narrow gauge line meant everything had to be transferred by hand to standard gauge cars once it reached the lowlands. It was slow and backbreaking work. Seeing the absolute fortune coming down the mountains, the newly formed Carolina and Northwestern bought out the Caldwell Northern in 1905. They had a grand vision. They didn't want a slow narrow gauge logging line. They wanted a heavy-duty standard gauge main line capable of hauling massive train loads of timber directly to the national markets. Throughout 1906, hundreds of laborers worked tirelessly to widen the old Caldwell Northern Road bed. They reinforced the bridges, smoothed out the sharpened curves, and laid heavy steel rail. By the late 1906, the standard gauge line officially reached the northernmost terminal, a remote mountain outpost that would become the beating heart of the logging boom, Edgemont, North Carolina. The Carolina Northwestern brought the main line into the mountains, but they didn't actually go into the deepest woods. For that, you needed the ultimate titan of the logging industry, the W.M. Ritter Lumber Company. Ritter built a sprawling temporary logging empire that branched off of the Carolina Northwestern. To navigate these ridiculous mountain slopes, where grades frequently exceeded terrifyingly 10%, Ritter didn't use ordinary locomotives. They used gear-driven Shay and Climax steam engines. These locomotives were mechanical marvels. Instead of big driving wheels that would slip on steep, muddy, and mountain rails, gears powered every single wheel on the train, giving them a maximum traction to crawl up the steep ridges like mechanical mountain goats. Before the logging boom, the Wilson Creek Gorge was practically empty, but W.M. Ritter and the railroad literally built a civilization out of nothing. This was the town of Mortimer. At its peak in the early 1910s, Mortimer was a booming, modern company town with over 800 residents. Ritter constructed a massive state-of-the-art 3-band sawmill that operated day and night, filling the gorge with the constant roar of machinery. Mortimer was entirely owned by the company. Ritter built the houses, the school, the church, a hotel for visitors, and the massive company store. In fact, many workers were not paid in US dollars, but in Ritter Company scrip. These tokens could only be spent at the Ritter Company store, meaning the wealth generated by the workers went right back into the company's pockets. It was a self-sustaining, isolated empire deep in the woods. Our exclusive map shows just how this operation was. Every ridge, every creek bed, every hollow was tracked down. But this rapid, aggressive logging created a massive, unintended environmental hazard. Millions of trees were clear-cut, leaving the steep mountain slopes completely bare. The nature root system that held the mountain soil together was gone. The stage was completely set for a catastrophe. In July of 1916, the absolute nightmare scenario became reality. Two separate powerful hurricane systems rolled inbound from the coast, colliding directly over the western North Carolina mountains. In a matter of days, feet of water dumped into slopes that had been completely stripped bare of vegetation by the logging industry. With no trees to absorb the water, the mountainside literally dissolved. A terrifying, monstrous wall of water, mud, and rogue logs rushed down the Wilson Creek Gorge. It ripped through the town of Mortimer with unimaginable force. The massive W.M. Ritter Lumber sawmill was completely obliterated. Houses were swept off of their foundations. The Carolina and Northwestern main line was completely destroyed. Miles of track were washed into the river, bridges were broken in half, and the backbone of the upper railroad was shattered. Ritter tried to rebuild, but the magic was gone. By the mid-1920s, the remaining timber was completely exhausted. The company closed its doors, leaving Mortimer to rapidly dissolve into a ghost town. In 1938, the Carolina Northwestern officially abandoned the steep, treacherous section between West Lenoir and Edgemont forever. So what's left of this legendary logging empire today? Well, if you know where to look, the ghosts of the can't and never will are hiding in plain sight. Large structure of Ocado Road and Brown Mountain Beach Road are built directly on top of the original narrow gauge railroad grading. When you drive these tight, sweeping curves, you are tracking the exact path of the old locomotives. If you look closely at the banks of Wilson Creek, you can still find massive, hand-cut stone abutments that held up the timber railroad bridges. They stand like an ancient jungle ruins, untouched by time. And in the deep woods near Wilson Creek Visitor Center, you can step directly into the ruins of Mortimer. These massive decaying concrete structures are the actual foundations of the W.M. Ritter sawmill. Because they were poured with heavy concrete, they were among the only structures sturdy enough to survive the terrifying 1916 flood. Nearby, the old wooden Carolina and Northwestern Railroad section house still stands, a lone, fragile monument to the community that timber built. The tracks into the high mountains have been swallowed by the Pisgah Forest, but the story of the Carolina and Northwestern isn't entirely dead. If you follow the old right-of-way out of the wilderness and back down into the valley floor, you will find that the final 17 miles of the historic line are very much alive. This is the Caldwell County Railroad, operating on the surviving southern sub of the old Carolina and Northwestern main line. This short line has been keeping local industry moving since 1994. Instead of hauling massive logs out of the wilderness, they haul vital materials like plastics, grain, and chemicals to the manufacturing plants crossing the Catawba River and keeping the valley economy rolling. But for rail fans and history buffs, the Caldwell County Railroad isn't just a functional short line. It's a living, breathing museum. Look closely at their motive power. While massive Class I railroads run standardized, modern, wide-cab diesel locomotives, the Caldwell County relies on two absolute legends, engines 1747 and 1811. These vintage EMD GP16 rebuilt locomotives, originally built way back in the 1950s, is what makes them the ultimate rail fan holy grail, is their paint. They are still wearing their original and untouched 1980s Family Line system paint schemes. Over 40 years after the Family Line's marketing alliance vanished from America's main lines, these gray, red, and orange veterans are still throttling up right here in North Carolina, running on the exact same roadbed laid down over a century ago. From the ambitious narrow-gauge streamers of the Caldwell Northern and the Chester and Lenoir, to the lost mountain empire of the W.M. Ritter Lumber Company, to the tragedy of the 1916 flood, and finally to these rolling time capsules in Hickory. This rail line has refused to die. The mountains have healed, and the logging camps are gone, but the spirit of Appalachian railroading still lives on. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more hidden railroad history just like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below. And I will see you guys trackside on the next adventure.